The first time I met Eric, he called me a lifesaver in heels. That was back when we were still using lawn chairs as office furniture, and the printer made a sound like it was dying in Morse code. West Coast Division was a skeleton crew, duct tape, and vibes. No playbook, no resources, just a broken CRM system, a whiteboard with a dream, and me, Denise, operations manager, sales manager, HR, and sometimes janitor, who ran the show while they figured out how to spell scalability. We were barely keeping the lights on, but I treated that office like it was my name on the deed. I stayed late to rewrite compliance manuals they hadn't updated since fax machines were cool. Flew to client sites last minute when vendors bailed. Worked through Christmas Eve once because the founder promised a client their system would be online by New Year's. My bonus that year, Starbucks gift card with $11.43 on it. I didn't even blink because I believed in what we were building. I believed they saw me. Now look, before I get too deep into the grave I built for my own loyalty, quick thing, if you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps the team keep telling stories like this one. And if you're nodding along already, give it a like. Understand why by the end. Anyway, year 1 turned to year 2, then 3. Suddenly I was managing 8 people. We had real chairs, a decent espresso machine, and a regional contract that tripled our revenue. I wasn't just doing the job, I was the job. Eric even told me once in his drunken honesty voice that if anything ever happened to him, I should just keep the engine running. So I did. And then came Amber. Should have known from the moment her email signature had entrepreneur in it, despite her biggest business win being a candle line that made it to 6 Whole Foods before spontaneously combusting on social media. She arrived in faux humility, saying she was here to learn from the ground up, which, in Amber speak, meant sitting in on my Zoom calls and interrupting to ask why I didn't use more emojis in client communication. Work ethic had all the substance of a Pinterest board and the depth of a wine tasting in a dry county. Still, I played along, smiled, gave her spreadsheets with training notes, even invited her to a pitch session so she could see what a real negotiation looked like. She was late, didn't take notes, and posted a selfie outside the building captioned, "Grit looks good on me." Subtle signs started stacking. Company holiday party somehow got relocated last minute, without me. Amber started referring to our clients as my network. Eric stopped looping me in on strategic calls. Then I got a calendar invite titled Talent Planning Review, and my stomach dropped faster than our stock after Amber tried tweeting through a product recall. The invite had no agenda. Just me, Eric, and HR. And if you've ever been in the startup world long enough, know what that means. HR had that soft voice loaded and ready, the one that says we value your contribution, right before they stick the knife in and ask if you'd like them to ship your personal items, or if you'd rather pick them up in a box like a sad game show prize. But instead of firing me, they dropped something worse. Eric leaned back like he was revealing a surprise proposal and said, "We've decided Amber will be the new VP of Regional Ops. All about legacy here, and she represents the future." I blinked, just blinked. I didn't scream, didn't throw anything, just sat there while they explained how I was such a valuable cultural force and how I'd thrive as a mentor during this new era. They wanted me to train her, to groom the girl who once asked me if invoices could be made cuter with glitter. Same girl who posted an unboxing video of our compliance handbook because she thought it was aesthetic. I left that meeting with a headache made of betrayal and espresso foam. That night, I went home, pulled out the dusty onboarding packet I hadn't looked at in 4 years, and started flipping through. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a reason to stay, maybe a loophole to crawl through. What I found was something else entirely. The morning after the announcement, office microwave still smelled like burnt popcorn and denial. HR had sent out a chirpy email with the subject line "Exciting Leadership Update," and a stock photo of Amber in a blazer 2 sizes too big, standing in front of a whiteboard like she'd just discovered the alphabet. Underneath it, Amber brings a fresh vision to our West Coast operations. Please join us in welcoming her as VP Regional Strategy. No mention of me, no footnote, not even a thanks, Denise, for turning this place from a financial dumpster fire into our most profitable division. Just confetti for the CEO's niece who once asked if Slack messages could be copyrighted. Eric stopped by my desk later, smelling like cologne and cowardice, and said, "Hey, kiddo. Big day, huh?" His smile had the same energy as a dad pretending everything's fine while packing the last box after a divorce. Patted the edge of my desk like it was a dog he didn't like and said, "We were hoping you'd be open to mentoring Amber through the transition. You know, pass the torch." Torch. I built the damn fire. I chopped the wood, sparked the flint, and kept the whole thing alive while they were off playing corporate Mad Libs. Now I was supposed to hand it to a girl who once scheduled a staff meeting during Coachella and then missed it because Harry Styles started late. I smiled. That tight, corporate smile women wear when they're 5 seconds from setting fire to a conference room, but still need the PTO to clear. "Of course," I said, happy to help however I can. Amber strutted in that afternoon like she'd just won The Apprentice. Sat in my chair, logged into my dashboard, asked if we had any branding opportunities in the metaverse. I walked past her with a cup of tea and a rage headache, nodding like a nun at a satanic ritual. They didn't fire me. Would have been cleaner. No, they wanted to humiliate me slowly, death by 1,000 pastel PowerPoints. Amber started hosting Vision Syncs, where she rebranded our core strategy by renaming bullet points with words like synergy and sparkle. She called one of my key clients a bit of a downer vibe. That client handled 18% of our regional revenue. I started documenting every botched client call she led, every missed KPI she glossed over. I screenshotted Slack threads, archived calendar invites, even printed her Instagram post where she captioned a photo from our private equity dinner. Big girl moves with the big boy funds nail briefcase blessed. The table's reflection showed my face, off to the side, out of focus, clearly uninvited to the real table now. Then I dug into my own files. 4 years of contracts, leases, onboarding materials, internal policies I'd rewritten and no one ever read. I remembered an offhand comment the old legal consultant made during onboarding, something about provisional authority. I flipped to the onboarding packet. Page 12, paragraph 3. In the event of regional executive turnover, all legal control of associated assets, data, and physical infrastructure shall remain with the provisional regional officer until formally reassigned through written legal procedure and notarized approval from both parties. Both parties. Was only one signature on file. Mine. I felt the chill run down my spine like someone had just opened a freezer behind my career. I sat in silence, no music, no Slack, just the dull hum of the HVAC system and the weight of what I'd just unearthed. They thought I was decoration, legacy fluff, the tired engine that got them to the next station and was ready for scrap. But they never checked what track I laid down to begin with. And now I started printing. Contracts, lease agreements, client MOUs, vendor clauses, anything that had my name on it or worse, needed my name to function. If they wanted me gone, that was fine. But I'd take the foundation with me, quietly, legally, one document at a time. The board meeting was held on a Thursday, which already felt like an omen. Thursday meetings are where ambition goes to die, too late in the week for energy, too early for closure. They flew in from the East Coast, usual parade of underqualified board members and overqualified appetizers. Amber, of course, insisted on leading the deck, her deck, except it wasn't hers, it was mine. I built the pipeline model, the forecasts, the client sentiment survey, the risk analysis. She changed the font and added her name. Called the file West Coast Magic Sparkles Final, use this one. If the glitter emoji had a voice, it would have cracked under the pressure she brought into that room. She opened with a pun. Something about ambition on the Amber Alert, which was exactly the level of professionalism you'd expect from someone who once tried to turn a layoff notice into a TikTok trend. Then she skipped the agenda slide entirely and dove into a demo that she'd never rehearsed. Slide 6 froze. The embedded video didn't play. Her interactive dashboard glitched into oblivion. Watching her try to troubleshoot on the spot was like watching a raccoon try to solve a Rubik's Cube, chaotic, loud, and in the end, everything just smelled like panic. "Denise, could you just jump in and walk us through this part?" Eric asked, with that same smarmy confidence men get when they assume the cleanup crew will always be waiting. I looked up slowly from my notebook, smiled. Oh, I wasn't part of this version. Better let her lead, it's her vision, after all. Amber shot me a glance like I'd just yanked the carpet out from under her heels, which, technically, I had, just not all at once. I took a sip of water and watched her drown. The CFO cleared his throat, so the client churn model, Amber blinked. I think Denise has those numbers." I didn't flinch, I might. But if you've got a new plan in place, I wouldn't want to confuse things. Eric rubbed his temples. "Maybe let's circle back." "Sure," I said. "Circling's what we do best lately." They moved on to marketing metrics, while Amber tried to reboot her dignity. I stared down at the old leather folder in front of me. Inside were the original onboarding docs from my first week, back when the West Coast division had 3 full-time employees and an intern who accidentally BCC'd a client on a meme thread. I dug it out the night before, thinking I might scan it for laughs. Page 12, though. Page 12 wasn't funny. That was where it listed my role as Provisional Regional Officer. Not manager, not acting, provisional. A weird, half-baked title the old legal consultant cooked up when we didn't have the headcount to justify exec titles. The board had never revisited it, and honestly, neither had I. But it was there, in writing, with my name and the founder's initials next to it. And more importantly, was referenced in 2 contracts I'd rediscovered: the property lease for our Sacramento office and the vendor exclusivity agreement tied to our primary cloud infrastructure. In plain English, my title wasn't just ceremonial. It was woven into the legal bedrock of our region's operations. Certain changes, especially those dealing with physical assets or sensitive data, couldn't be made without my written approval. Or, at the very least, formal reassignment process I'd never been asked to sign. I sat in that boardroom like a ghost no one knew was still haunting the place. They thought I was watching the fall of Denise. What they didn't realize was that I was already halfway out the door, carrying the only flashlight through the tunnel. The meeting adjourned in awkward handshakes and boardroom mints. Amber looked ready to cry or tweet, I couldn't tell which. Rick clapped me on the back like he hadn't just served me a lukewarm betrayal 2 weeks ago. "Thanks for being a team player today," he said. I smiled, always happy to support from the sidelines. Then I went back to my desk and started pulling more threads. I started with the passwords, not the obvious ones, Slack, email, or her beloved West Coast Girlboss HQ Notion board, but the ones that really mattered. The vendor portals, security credential registries, admin console for our data storage provider. Anything tied to legal identity or tied to me directly. I opened a private spreadsheet labeled Santa's List and began sorting what I had full access to, what I had signatory authority over, and what would break the moment my name disappeared. Then I let her drive. Amber had been begging for more autonomy ever since her mentor TikTok started getting traction. So I gave it to her. Stopped double-checking her client emails. Let her approve that insane rebrand proposal from a college friend who'd once designed t-shirts for a failed EDM festival. Let her authorize the marketing spend for that doomed influencer collab with a vape-themed fashion line called Cloud Daddy. Let her drown in her own glitter. She didn't even notice the silence. That's the thing about people like Amber. They mistake a lack of feedback for confidence, not detachment. Every time she fumbled a call or gave a client the wrong timeline, she'd spin it like disruption was part of the strategy. She even made a Canva slide about operational chaos as a growth accelerant. I watched her present that to the finance team while sipping my coffee so slowly it was practically performance art. Meanwhile, I began the great unwinding. I started forwarding vendor contacts directly to her, with a breezy looping you in, a subtle removal of my name from renewal notices. I let support tickets go unanswered. I let our Q3 inventory forecast go stale. The one-soiled machine began coughing. Amber thought the rattling noise meant we needed new dashboards. I let her build them. They had the structural integrity of a cereal box. Then I did something radical for a woman in my position. I stopped fixing things. There was a client onboarding checklist I'd built from scratch, 37 bullet points long, cross-referenced with 3 systems. I trained every account manager on it like it was sacred text. Amber decided to streamline it down to 6 steps and a Pinterest mood board. I nodded. Sounds efficient. A week later, a $2.4 million account was onboarded with the wrong compliance scope. When legal asked what happened, Amber said, "We're just prototyping a new journey." I watched the GC's eyelid twitch and pretended to take notes. One of the executive assistants, a sharp kid named Caleb, leaned over in the break room one day and whispered, "Did you see that she scheduled a QBR during Yom Kippur for Jewish-owned account?" I just smiled. Let the princess drive. I wasn't sabotaging. I was abstaining. There's a difference. You see, the operational systems were mine, not legally, but spiritually. I built them, tuned them. The duct tape so well it looked like design. When I stopped propping them up, the cracks weren't new. They were just finally visible. Amber didn't know the names of our key vendors, didn't know which contracts auto-renewed, Didn't realize that our insurance coverage for regional equipment expired on October 1st unless manually renewed by a signatory me, and I wasn't doing it. The silence was my rebellion, and in that silence I moved. Quietly, I scrubbed my name from internal wikis, removed myself from group permissions in the back-end systems, one checkbox at a time. Each one was like a finger lifted from a dam. But I didn't touch the contracts. Those stayed. My name etched in PDFs and DocuSigns. Provisional Regional Officer, Authorized Signatory, Data Steward. Titles no one ever updated because no one ever thought they'd need to. That was the thing. They assumed legacy was dead weight, not realizing that when you cut loose the ballast, the balloon doesn't rise, it drifts. Uncontrolled, untethered. I watched the drift begin. One misfiled invoice. One panicked email from accounting. One confused vendor asking who the hell Amber was and why she thought Net15 was a social media platform. Eric walked by one afternoon and said, "I feel like things are finally humming." I smiled so hard I thought my jaw might crack. Oh, they're humming, all right. I went back to my desk, opened my folder, checked the dates on every document that still had my name. October 15th, November 1st, December 31st. They thought I was fading into irrelevance, but what I was really doing was waiting for the engine to seize. Eric wore cufflinks that day, not the regular silver ovals he'd worn back when we used to problem solve over takeout and panic. These were gold-plated with little crown emblems. Subtle, the way a peacock in a boardroom is subtle. The kind of thing you wear when you've already decided you're the king and just need everyone else to agree. The boardroom was staged for optics, glass carafes of cucumber water, fresh-pressed printouts of the new org chart, and nameplates that had magically dropped interim from Amber's title. She sat beside him like a Barbie grafted onto a LinkedIn post. Tight smile, a laptop she didn't know the password to, a folder she hadn't opened. I was on the other end of the table. No fanfare, no coffee, just my old manila folder and a set of keys in my jacket pocket that weighed more than gold. Eric cleared his throat like he was warming up for a TED talk. "Today's a symbolic transition," he said, lacing his fingers together like the mentor in a startup drama. "We're evolving past legacy leadership into a new phase of innovation and youthful energy." Legacy leadership was me, not Denise. Not the woman who tripled revenue and built the West Coast team from duct tape and divorcees. Just legacy, a dusty photo in the hallway of progress. Amber smiled like she understood what any of that meant. She was wearing a blazer with the tag still dangling from under the sleeve. It read, "PowerFit 3000. Eric kept going. He thanked the board for their vision, thanked Amber for her relentless optimism, said something about embracing new lanes of success. Then, as if I were a potted plant or a wall sconce, he nodded in my direction and said, "We're grateful to Denise for laying the groundwork. Her role in this journey has been foundational, like drywall." I didn't respond. I didn't cry, didn't roll my eyes, didn't even blink. I just reached into my jacket, pulled out the key ring, office, storage, server cabinet, even the one to the espresso machine I'd fixed myself, and slid them across the polished table. They landed with a soft jingle that sounded to me like the start of a symphony. Eric paused, confused by the silence. Denise," I stood, straightened my blazer, buttoned it slowly. "Good luck," I said. That was it. I didn't bow. I didn't make a speech. I walked out while Amber was still fumbling to open her presentation. I knew still had placeholder charts because I'd seen the Google Doc that said "fix this later" in neon pink font. She clicked the wrong slide. Financials for Q3 appeared, showing a double-digit dip she couldn't explain. Behind me, a pause. Then, "Wait, Denise, could you clarify the—" I kept walking. Through the hallway. Past the HR director pretending to be busy with a non-existent call. Past the interns who once treated me like a walking encyclopedia. On the elevator, where I looked at my reflection and thought, you just buried them and they don't even know they're bleeding yet. The best part? They thought I was done. They thought that was the end of the movie, where the burned-out exec walks away into the sunset while a ukulele song plays in the background. What they didn't realize was that I hadn't walked away from the power. I just walked away from the building, because while Amber was about to discover that financial projections don't magically fix themselves, and while Eric would soon learn what a missing signature meant on a lease renewal form, I was already on the move. Contracts untouched, data controls still active, vendor relationships tied to my name and my name only, and a clause buried on page 12 that they never once bothered to read. 10 minutes. That's all it took. 10 minutes after I left the boardroom. Before Amber could even reboot her cursed PowerPoint, the alert went off in legal's backend system like a silent fire alarm. It was automated, built into our contract tracking platform, something I helped implement back when no one could remember which vendor still billed us via fax. The alert read, primary asset access changed. Status, inactive. Action required. 3 regional contracts. 2 vendor authorization tokens. 1 lease renewal window ticking like a time bomb with no one holding the detonator key. Downstairs, I was already in the parking garage. Calm, not triumphant, just done. There's a quiet that comes after a clean break. Not relief, not regret, just clarity. I didn't need to win. I'd already built the battlefield they didn't know they were fighting on. Upstairs, their general counsel, Martin, sharp as ever, and the only adult left in that sandbox, was mid-email when the alert pinged. He stopped, read it twice, checked the timestamp. 3:42 p.m., looked up. Wait, he said slowly to no one in particular. Who's the counter-signatory on your West Coast lease agreements? The room paused. Amber glanced up from her tablet, still stuck on a loading screen. Eric was leaned back, mid-shuckle, clearly unaware that the iceberg had just touched the hull. Sorry, what? Eric asked, eyes narrowing like a man being offered an unfamiliar vegetable. Martin turned his laptop around. We just lost access to 3 core contracts tied to Denise's region. Our system logged her permissions as inactive effective immediately. Amber's voice went up an octave. Oh, that must just be like IT stuff, right? Martin didn't blink. No, this isn't IT, this is legal authority. Access only goes inactive if a named signatory relinquishes their role or is removed in writing. I haven't processed anything like that. Eric sat up straight. Can't we just assign someone new? Martin closed the laptop. Sure, as soon as we identify who had the authority, who signed the original contracts, silence. Amber looked at Eric. Eric looked at Amber. Then they both looked at the HR director. Looked like she wished the conference table would swallow her whole. Amber cleared her throat. Well, Denise was just a manager, right? Like she didn't have. Martin cut her off. She wasn't just anything. She was the provisional regional officer. It's in our legal architecture. That's a title we've been using on our filings since 2019. And unless someone here filed formal reassignment paperwork, which, again, I have not received, still holds residual control. Eric's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. What does that mean exactly? He asked, voice tight. Martin stood up. It means she still controls the lease agreements on Sacramento and Palo Alto. It means she's still the named contact for the insurance coverage on our regional assets. It means the data access for client infrastructure is still routed through credentials tied to her signatory rights. Amber paled. But I have the passwords. Martin sighed like a man watching toddlers play with chainsaws. Passwords don't mean jack if the legal authority behind the asset says otherwise. We can't change ownership. We can't even renew without her. And if those contracts lapse without reassignment, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was nuclear. Because suddenly, this wasn't about mentorship or optics or fresh leadership. This was about something no one in that room had the foresight or humility to check. Ownership. The kind that doesn't post selfies. The kind that doesn't come with hashtags or startup press blurbs. The kind you don't see until it's gone. And while they scrambled to piece together who dropped the legal ball, I sat in my car with the windows down, listening to the hum of traffic and sipping the overpriced matcha I'd bought as a treat. Because when you spend 4 years building something with your hands, your brain, and your sanity, you don't burn it down when they hand it off to a fraud. You just take the blueprints with you. The email came in at 9:12 p.m. Subject line, follow-up from today's board meeting time sensitive. No salutation, no fluff. Just a single sentence. Would you be available to speak with legal this week regarding access and administrative transitions? Polite. Neutral. Loaded like a gun wrapped in gift paper. I waited 6 hours before replying. Sure, I wrote. Happy to clarify anything that's unclear. I chose a neutral cafe downtown, public, bright, safe from whatever emergency meeting optics they were trying to preserve. Martin, the GC, arrived with his assistant and a company-issued laptop. No tie, no smile, just the faint exhaustion of a man realizing too late that no one reads the contracts until the building's already on fire. I brought a manila folder. Same one I'd carried into my onboarding 4 years earlier. Same folder that had held my first payroll slip, a crumpled receipt from our first client dinner, and now my ace of spades. We ordered tea. He small-talked. I listened. Then he exhaled. Denise, I won't waste your time. There's been some confusion regarding access authority on several operational fronts. I opened the folder, pulled out the first document, slid it across the table. Page 12, I said. He didn't touch it, just read. It was the onboarding packet, the original one, issued by their former legal consultant, who now lived off-grid in Oregon selling handcrafted beard oil. Page 12 contained the clause, the one no one ever amended, that said, in the event of regional leadership transition, all operational authority, data access, and physical asset control shall remain vested in the provisional regional officer, unless formally reassigned through dual notarized agreement. Martin leaned back. And that was never reassigned, I said, calm as a breeze. No dual signatures, no notarization. No one even asked me to. He nodded. And the contracts? I pulled out the next set, 3 of them, annotated, dated, color-coded with post-it flags. Lease agreement, Sacramento HQ. Vendor agreement, primary cloud infrastructure provider. Insurance binder, covers 3 office sites and 40% of our physical assets. Each document listed me as the signatory, not as a witness, not as a manager, as the named authority. Denise, he said carefully, we'd like to resolve this as quickly as possible. There's concern about disruption, investor reaction. I pulled the final page from my folder, placed it gently on top, an unsigned exit agreement, drafted by HR 6 months ago, back when I asked for a role review. They never sent it back. I never followed up. There it sat, quiet, binding, and incomplete. No exit paperwork, I said. No formal revocation. My name remains attached to every line that matters. Martin looked up. Are you planning to litigate? I smiled. I'm planning to clarify. 'Tis Temple. What would you need to help us move forward? I let the question hang, not for drama, for weight. I'm not here to wreck anything, I said, but I built that region. I signed those agreements. I protected those relationships. And you can't just decide one day that history starts over because a nepotism hire wants a clean canvas. He nodded slowly. So what do you want? I leaned forward. Truth, recognition, and a clean exit on my terms. Swallowed? Would you be open to drafting a transition framework? I already have, I said, tapping the folder. And Martin? Yes. Tell Eric the next time he calls someone legacy, he should make sure they don't own the past. Outside, the city buzzed like nothing was happening. But inside that cafe, the ground had already shifted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just reminded them who built the floor they were standing on. It started with a spreadsheet. Martin ran a compliance matrix first thing the next morning. He pulled every contract tied to regional infrastructure and ran a filter. Signatory equals Denise. The results weren't pretty. 7 entries, 3 states, all tagged as active, no replacement filed. One of them had a red flag next to it, the insurance rider that covered all regional data storage equipment. It expired in 11 days. Renewal required the signature of the named provisional officer, not the acting VP, not legal, me. They held an emergency internal call. Eric joined late, sipping from a mug that said best boss ever, which in context was now almost performance art. Amber dialed in from a co-working space, clearly rattled. No makeup, hoodie, hair tied back like she just rolled out of a sobbing session and into a leadership role she never actually earned. Martin laid it out plainly. Without Denise's cooperation, we're legally exposed in California, Washington, and Nevada. Vendor contracts couldn't be amended. Insurance couldn't be renewed. Lease auto-renewals were on hold pending reassignment signatures. And worst of all, client data controls were still bound to back-end systems linked to Denise's credential tree. Amber tried to jump in. Can't we just override her? I mean, can't IT just change it? Martin didn't even look up from his screen. No. Would breach contract terms and trigger noncompliance penalties, possibly litigation if vendors or clients push back. Eric scratched his forehead, suddenly looking a lot older than his profile photo. So, what? We just hand everything back to her? Martin raised an eyebrow. No one's handing anything back. She never relinquished it. That's when the panic bled beyond legal. Someone CC'd the investor distro on a high-priority compliance status update. Not a smart move, but understandable when you're watching your entire infrastructure slowly collapse like a souffle made of ego and assumption. The investors didn't wait long. One of them replied all. Just one line, this is what you fired. Amber saw the email. She was standing outside the hallway during the next impromptu crisis call, phone in hand, tears welling up like an understudy who realized the play was real and she'd never read the script. She tried to compose herself, but the sound of her muffled crying echoed into the background of the call until someone muted her line. Eric finally asked the one question he should have asked months ago. What does she want? Martin didn't answer right away, because the truth was, at this point, it didn't matter what I wanted. What mattered was that they needed me, and not just for signatures, for survival. I wasn't just the person who could fix things. I was the only person who knew how they were built. They thought they could erase me with a reorg. But a reorg doesn't undo contracts, or passwords, or authority tied to forgotten clauses buried in onboarding documents no one ever read. I got a follow-up call at 4:47 p.m. Martin again, this time less guarded. Denise, I think we underestimated the scope of your, involvement. I let that sit a beat. Not unusual, I said. Most people underestimate things they didn't bother to understand. He exhaled. Would you be open to attending a board session next week to formalize transition terms? I'm not opposed, I said, tapping my pen against the folder still on my desk. But let's not call it a transition. Let's call it a correction. That night, I poured a glass of wine, checked my email. There were 4 new messages from board members, none of whom had ever spoken to me directly in 4 years. Subject lines like touching base, appreciated insights, and the deeply panicked call me anytime, even late. I didn't respond, because finally, I wasn't being chased for a favor. I was being recognized, not as a legacy, as a cornerstone. The boardroom looked different this time. Fewer smiles, no catered lunch. The complimentary waters had been replaced with half-empty bottles and tension you could taste. Gone were the startup slogans on the whiteboard, placed by a list of dates and deadlines scribbled in red. Insurance Oct 31. Vendor renewal NOV 2, lease signature pending. They'd stopped pretending it wasn't a fire. Now they just hoped I'd bring the extinguisher. Eric was already seated, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, trying to signal we're all in this together when he was the one who pushed me out of the cockpit in the first place. Amber wasn't present. Heard around the hallways was she'd taken emergency personal leave. The hallway wall still had her welcome VP Amber poster, curling at the corners like the resignation letters they'd never let me submit. Martin stood as I entered. No handshake, no preamble. Just a folder in front of him and a solemn nod. Denise, he said, voice even. Thank you for coming. I sat, calm, no anger, just purpose. He glanced at the others, legal, finance, one board member who had flown in just for this, and then looked to me. For the record, he said, could you please confirm which operational assets are still under your legal authority? I opened my tablet. The screen glowed softly in the dim room. My notes were clean, bullet-pointed, labeled with cross-referenced contract IDs. I read aloud, slow and steady. Data infrastructure for the West Coast region, including admin credentials and compliance routing for our 3 primary cloud environments. Signed lease rights for properties located in Sacramento, Palo Alto, and Bellevue, each still assigned to me as provisional signatory with auto-renewal control. Primary relationship management rights with Reading Pharmaceuticals, including the exclusivity clause they negotiated in 2021, still linked to my named point of contact status. I paused, looked around the room, not a breath. Eric had gone pale, his hands clasped in front of his mouth like he was praying to the ghost of competence. One board member was typing notes furiously. Another simply stared at me like I'd turned water into wine in front of them. I closed the tablet. You wanted me out, I said, voice soft but steady. You just forgot to check who built the foundation. Silence again, not the kind that demands a response, kind that is the response. Eric finally leaned forward. Denise, we'd like to find a solution here. I nodded, you will, but it'll be one I help write. Because I didn't ask for power, I earned it, quietly, while you were busy auditioning your niece for a leadership role she couldn't even spell. Martin cleared his throat. We'd be open to drafting a formal transition package that includes advisory status, and I held up a hand. Don't offer anything today. Just think about who you'll ask to fix the roof after you fired the architect. I stood, gathered my things, no drama, no gloating, just the natural conclusion of a lesson they taught themselves the hard way. As I reached the door, I turned back. Oh, and if anyone's wondering about that espresso machine in the break room, they all looked up. I still have the key. And then I walked out, not with vengeance, but with ownership. The kind you don't need permission to carry. The kind that never had to scream to be heard. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.